Hi there, and welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hello there, welcome to episode 103 of 1% Better, and this one we touch on, or maybe more than touch on, dive into the areas of precision medicine, and it's with a gentleman that you may not have heard of yet, but I'm sure you will in the near future. His name is Jo Bhakdi, and we'll talk a little bit about Jo in a minute. I'm challenging myself in this intro to not only one, keep it relatively short, which I'm going to fail at, two, to do it all in one take without any edits. I'm recording it on video as well, because I'll be putting a video of this episode out with Jo. So let's see how we get on. So the first 4 episodes of season 3 are out. First 4 interviews. We touched on football management with Neil Fenn and leadership. We talked with Sheila Mann and Sheila about communes, leadership values. We touched on relationships with Susan Winter. And then last week, one on financial management and how to be maybe a little bit better at how you manage your finances with Paddy Delaney. And that one has got some good feedback. I took a lot out of it myself, as I say, from nearly every episode. I try to implement or take something out that I will put into practice. The one thing that stood out with Paddy's episode, or one of the things, he mentioned in 1929, since 1929, 11% per year growth on average with investments or with the stock exchange, I think it might have been. And while there's ups and downs, and nearly every year things go down and come back up, over that period of time, year on year, 11% growth. And maybe somebody can write in and say that's not true. I'm taking Paddy's word for it. But it certainly got me thinking to, when I'm investing, to keep it in for the longer haul. But again, going back to Paddy's, one of his first comments was, what is your goal? Do you know what the purpose of your savings is for? So that always helps. And he talks a lot about purpose and really having smart investments. So check it out if you haven't. Tangible results there. There's a disclaimer, the show notes, just to say it is a financial advice and some useful tips, but I don't think you can come back after me or Paddy if it doesn't work out. The frequency of releases, I'm trying to release maybe podcasts more frequently over the coming weeks. It's difficult. I tend to record bunches and then release a few. So some of the folks I've interviewed probably in January and February are wondering where their episode is. It'll come, but I'm trying to edit more in batch and release more. So hopefully over the next few weeks get maybe 2 out a week for a period of time and catch up. We'll see. Definitely plan to do some live stream shows. I have a few guests lined up. It's just a matter of locking it all in and putting it out. So exciting times ahead as always. And this one is definitely an exciting episode. Exciting in that it talks about how Jo and his company Quantgene are focusing in on really, really early detection of cancer using precision medicine, which includes artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data analytics, to detect cancer way earlier than it is done today. Jo's company Quantgene has been up and running for a few years. I'm just going to read a little. He's a pioneer in this area. His utilization of big data combined with advanced DNA analysis detects dangerous diseases with unprecedented accuracy before symptoms even occur. And that's me reading it, but from the episode, during it I went for long spells without having to say a word because of the detail in which Jo was sharing his story, but also sharing his focus in on how to identify early stage cancer, the like of which I had never heard explained in such detail before. All the way through, what was going on in my head was, this guy is a genius. He is a polymath. He reminds me of Elon Musk. He tends to mention Elon Musk a few times, and we talk about not only the company but emotional intelligence in general, and how education should potentially change into the future, how we can maybe study folks like Elon Musk, how they make decisions, how they approach challenges and problems, and then try and solve them, and use that model to create maybe training camps or schools for folks that can utilize some of those techniques, then apply some of that to solve problems on a wider scale. A fascinating guy. I absolutely am convinced if this product that they're releasing to detect cancer really, really early lifts off later this year. They're in clinical trials, but it should be coming out later in the year. He is going to be a very much household name or globally known. So I'm probably lucky from the perspective of getting in early and having a chat with him to understand his thought process, his ability to think critically. He talks about critical thinking and the ladder of improbability, which he will go into detail on in the show. Yeah, again, look, it was a fascinating one. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, I'd love you to share it out with your own circle, with your own network. Last season, the episode that was listened to most was in the space of medicine as well, Psychobiotics from Ted Dinan, UCC professor. I'm excited about this one because I think it's tapping into something we're all concerned about. Cancer impacts every single one of us in some way, shape or form, and anything that we can get that could help identify it way earlier and ultimately defeat it is more than a good thing. Enjoy it. If you do, subscribe to the show, help me rank that up further so other folks can hear it. Check out it on the website. Lots of good stuff there. And I think I'm there and I've done it all in one take. There we go. Not so bad. I'll hand it over to Jo Bhakdi. Enjoy the episode, guys, and have a great weekend, a great week ahead. Good luck.
So we started the company in 2014. Technically, we incorporated in 2015. There's always a little starting runway. And what we do is we develop the first kind of multi-cancer detection test, blood-based. So we are working on a product that allows us to detect multiple cancers, probably up to 12 different cancers, early stage in the blood. And the reason we can do that is that there's a lot of underlying technology breakthroughs that came into play over the last 5 years. Next generation sequencing got to a very important point, price-wise and accuracy-wise. There are some more chemistry innovations that allow us to have error reduction. I can go into all these things later. There's a lot of machine learning breakthroughs, and there's also a general sense in the financial community that this is happening. And all these things came together. And then at the center, I was basically a newcomer to the field to some extent, because I'm an economist. I was in quantitative finance before, did some startups, was in mergers and acquisitions. So I didn't have a typical medical track record, but my family is all, everyone is a doctor or a scientist, and I grew up in a lab more or less. So I know that stuff kind of intuitively, which is an interesting thing. How this actually shapes your view. I was never afraid of reading some biology papers or microbiology or whatever, and found it always pretty natural. And yeah, I had this basic breakthrough idea in 2014 when I was working with someone else on cancer detection, just helping him out on the quantitative side about genomics, and had this idea. And I can go into the idea if you want. It's a little geeky, but it's about pattern recognition. It's about genomics. And, to make it very simple, I had the idea that there is a specific way of looking at DNA in the blood, that if you do it in a very different way than people did it back then, using some machine learning and pattern recognition before you do it, so you're much more focused on what you look for, you could massively increase the precision with that you look at all these, millions or billions of DNA fragments in the blood. And yeah, that was first a theory. And I was working on something else at that time, but it was so compelling that I started doing this as a side thing, called some people up at UC Berkeley that we know through some networks, and a friend at Sloan Kettering, and I told them my idea, which was a total outsider idea. So I thought maybe I'm just crazy. Let's check with these guys. And then they all said, that's actually very interesting, that idea. And they have never heard it before, but it makes total sense. And so basically I started working on Quantgene totally as a side project first in 2014 and 15. And then very rapidly it turned into this thing where, it's basically this ladder of improbabilities, right? So at every step you think this can't really be, it's just a great idea. But I'm sure if I check it, the next expert I talk to is going to say, that's just stupid, you overlooked something. But the opposite happened. Every time I spoke to someone, it's like, wow, that's pretty cool. Wow. Should work. And so I climbed up this ladder, and every step where I saw, wait, again, that should work, and that should work, and that should work. And then suddenly it dawned on me, maybe the whole thing works, which I did not expect at that time. And so because it seemed improbable to me that you can just have an idea and suddenly you detect cancer early stage in the blood, which basically defeats cancer if you do it right.
Wow.
It seemed like improbable that you can just stumble upon that. But, I dug deeper and deeper and deeper. And then suddenly we had a company. I raised some angel money and did a little mini clinical trial with my friend, Dr. Hagen, who's very, well connected in the medical community, one of the leading people in robotic surgery in the world. And then this worked out perfectly. And then I thought, maybe we should raise more money. And then we raised a little bit more money. And now, we are at Series A and well funded and moved to Santa Monica. I have a commercial lab in Irvine, have a very big clinical trial going on. And now it's a very real thing. So it's kind of a crazy story. And I'm happy to chat more about it.
Yeah, wow, so a lot of questions have come up for me kind of when you were talking through that there. That way sometimes I might have an idea I think is brilliant, and as soon as I go online it's already gone, and somebody else has done it. And I think recently I came up with an idea for doing kind of the similar business model for Uber, but for gyms, for fitness centers, but that's happening now as well, so that's not going to work out for me. But when you come up with the idea, I suppose first of all, how did it even form? Where did it come from? You said you were working on something else. What kind of put it into your mind?
So I think the takeaway is, for me, because I had to deal with startups a lot before, but more from an outside or investor perspective. And I think the difference is if you have an idea everyone can have based on what goes into the idea, then you're in a bad position. So if you just have the idea, let's detect cancer, that's a bad idea because you're not the first one. But this idea was much more specific. So if you have an idea about a specific data set and the data set is very big and no one has it, and you acquire it, and then you dig deeper and then it works, then it's very unlikely anyone else can have that specific idea. So I was working with my brother. He's a doctor and engineer, and he worked on a magnetic cell separation device. So that allows you to negatively select cells out of blood samples. And what negative selection means is you can basically select the white blood cells out of that sample. And so that means any cell that's not a white blood cell, that is a bigger cell, not red blood cells, but bigger cells with DNA in it, remain in the sample. So that's called negative selection, because you're not supposed to have any cells in the blood that are not white blood cells that have DNA. So it's mostly bacteria, or it could be tumor cells. So my idea was back then, let's use it for cancer detection. Because if you have circulating tumor cells, because a tumor has shed a cell, into the bloodstream, which is bad, by the way, then they circulate, and if you take blood samples and can remove all the white blood cells, you have something left that is potentially a tumor cell, but you don't know. And so basically we thought about ways of identifying the remaining cells, because it's non-trivial, right? You have to do it somehow. You have to do something with the cells to determine what it is. And you can do it protein-based, based on the membrane and, some surface traits, but that's very unreliable for many reasons. And my idea was, the most reliable thing is sequence them, like look at the DNA. Because we know that cancer cells cannot have the same DNA. They must have damage, they must have mutations. Otherwise, they're not cancer cells. And at least with a very high degree of certainty, maybe in theory, you could have a cancer cell that maybe does not have somatic mutations, but I think that's highly speculative, and it's very likely they all have somatic mutations. So basically then the question is, okay, let's assume you can sequence the cell and see the DNA. How would you know if it's a cancer mutation or not? Because you have 3.3 billion nucleotides on a DNA, and you can have many mutations on that DNA, and nearly none of them is a tumor mutation, just statistically, right? So tumor mutations need to be very specific. And so I thought that can't be too hard, and started thinking about, there must be known tumor mutations. And we looked into that, and yes, there are many that are known, but the problem is a different problem. It's not about if you find a mutation, then you can check if it's a cancer mutation. The question is more, if you have 100 cancer cells from 100 different tumors, and you look at any specific mutation, tumor mutation, at how many do you have to look at in order to make sure you would capture all 100 different tumor cells, right? And none of them escapes, because if you look at 10 mutations and all 10 do not exist in one tumor, but number 11 exists, and you don't look at 11, you're missing this tumor, right? It's very simple. It's like, I don't know, looking for terrorists, and terrorists wear headphones and gray sweaters, for example.
Thanks.
But then there's another type of terrorist that doesn't wear them, but has no hair or something. So you have 3 traits. If you look for 2 traits, you could potentially miss this type. And in cancer, this is much more complicated because you have millions of mutations. And so that sucked me into that rabbit hole. And I thought, like, well, how could we, what do we have to look for in order to tell with certainty if a cell is a tumor cell or not? And that opened this whole thing, because then I started talking to some friends at Stanford and in Germany, some universities who are in cancer research. And I never got a good answer from anyone. Everyone said, like, well, that's all very difficult questions because you have millions of mutations, billions of nucleotides on each individual DNA. No one knows anything. Of course, we know something, but it's a vast space, and who knows? And it's all very new, this data-based perspective. And only in 2009 did the world even start to investigate on a systematic level all the cancer mutations by collecting these huge data sets. But they just started in 2009, the US government, and then the European governments jumped in to build these databases, but they're super new, and just a few geeks use them, and no one knows what the data format looks like. So then it dawned on me that this is crazy. Like if even our experts, who are some of the world leading people in systems biology and cancer, if they don't have an answer, and they are very smart, so they know exactly what they know and what they don't know, and told me, no, listen, we don't know. Like, no one knows right now. We know some things, but no one has a comprehensive understanding of all the cancer mutations, because who knows? So I realized, well, if we would actually, we are clearly at the cutting edge here in terms of asking the right questions, and these data sets become available right now. So maybe we just jump ahead and collect these data sets and then try to make a systematic analysis of these data sets with that question in mind.
Wow.
So we just figured out in my network, is there anyone who understands these data sets, who can get them for me, and then do some magic with it on the algorithmic side. And that basically was my idea. Like, the idea was, get this data set. Can we get it? Okay, we can get it. And then ask certain questions algorithmically, like, can we systematically screen all these different cancer patients with the entire DNA that was sequenced in the tumor tissue? And can we identify patterns of mutations, and then can we minimize these patterns without losing any of these patients in the data set? And then see what happens, and then figure out, can we actually reduce the number of mutations we look at? And if we can do that, then we could devise a totally new method that's much more focused and much, much more effective.
Good Lord. I don't think I've spoken less in the start of a podcast before, just trying to take in all of that information, and hopefully people that listen probably get it even better than I did. What I'm thinking as you're talking through it, though, and looking at your background, you have a master's in economics and psychology. You've startups in finance. You're obviously heavy on innovation, and your background with your family in medicine. Like, is it a polymath? It seems like you have intense ability to go deep in all of these areas. Like, has that always been your approach to problems? Do you see them and then just do they consume you?
Yes. So I don't know why, but when I was 19, I think, right after high school, I was always pretty broadly interested in things. So in high school, I took like a very broad set of subjects. I had like ancient Greek was one of my majors, and I loved that stuff, like philosophy and this whole idea from mythos to logos, like how humanity evolved from mystical thinking into logical thinking, and how difficult that is. And that many people still didn't make this transition, or many cultures. And it's very hard to explain what it actually means, but that's kind of a guiding principle. Once you really get it, that, oh, we can logically investigate the world, and it's about critical thinking, you don't have to be, many people say, if I'm not an expert, I can't deal with it. It's like, who knows it's medicine, or who knows it's rockets, I can't deal with rockets.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really true. Everyone can deal with everything. You just have to know what you know and what you don't know, right? So, I mean, you can get information, you can ask experts, and then critically question these experts, especially if you have multiple of them, and form your own opinion that can be very sharp if it's first principle based, right? So you can quickly get to high levels of certainty about any subject, as long as you follow certain rules, right? You can't be certain if you cannot be certain, then you're just dumb, like making mistakes. But at a certain point, you can connect some dots and say, well, I don't know most of the things, but based on the information I have, I can be absolutely certain. In my example, well, if there's a data set and there are mutations and we figure out the smallest pattern, we can detect cancer. That's just absolutely certain. I'm not saying we can. I'm saying if we had the data set and figure that out, and it's a certain critical size, we can absolutely do it. So I think I was very early on fascinated by the idea that you can solve any problem if you just had the right knowledge. So all you have to do is figure out how you generate the right knowledge. So I know that sounds like maybe confusing, but I don't know. I have this conviction that you can do that. So that always drove me at a certain faith that you can do it.
Okay. So I'm fascinated about the difference between IQ and EQ, right? So people that have a lot of time a very high IQ may not have high EQ. They say EQ can be developed much more than IQ is pretty set at a young age. I would imagine, based on what you're talking about, there's quite an overlap between the two in your world. And if there's certain things you're able to solve, and then others you look at experts to help you. What kind of comes up for you when I kind of talk about that?
I think that's a great question. Whatever EQ exactly is, but
Emotional
I think
intelligence, yeah, you know that. Obviously.
Yeah, but I mean, it's more. Maybe it's another IQ. It's like the intuition quotient or something, right? So So what I see, because we talk a lot now that we are a little bigger and everyone takes it more seriously, we talk a lot to Wall Street analysts, or analysts at very sophisticated biotech funds. And it's not just in our case. I think it's also applicable to other cool companies like Tesla and their analysts and everything. So what I see is people with very high IQ, and these people have very high IQ. I mean, they're very smart people, right? And they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of intelligence. And often they miss something that you could call EQ, right? They miss the big picture, just
the common sense in some ways, I would say.
Yeah, the common sense, right? So, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges in innovation to maintain both levels. And I'm not saying that I'm great at that. I'm just saying I take it very seriously to kind of stay stupid to some extent. I always, and I think it's very difficult because it's contradicting. The more you want to be smart and understand everything and go into the details and understand the logic behind it and try to figure out that key lever that changes it, the more you get sucked into very deep details. So in due diligence, when you look at a company and try to figure out if a startup is smart and you don't have much time, you have to jump into a totally new sector, which I had to do before. My favorite paradigm is like the T paradigm. It's like a T. I mean, you go very broad, very quickly, and then you take one thing and go super deep. So basically, if you look at a car factory or someone who wants to sell his car company, you ask them all the questions of what's your market, what's your IP, how do you build these cars, why do you think you're better, what's with the cars, and then you say, well, take me to a manufacturing plant, and then you go all the way down and you look at the screws and you talk to one worker and ask them, how is it today? What do you do here? And most people never do that. They stay on the horizontal level because it's easy. And I think that's also not just for due diligence, it's also the way you have to approach complex problems. You have to go super deep and find some really theoretically important key lever, but then you have to jump back out and say, like, what are we actually doing here? For example, in cancer detection, many of these smart analysts, they question if there is, how we tackle the market. Like, so how do you get this thing out? There are so many regulatory issues. And how to convince oncologists to buy a new test that is totally unknown. Yeah, you have clinical studies, but there are so many obstacles. And sometimes I just have to take a step back and say, like, dudes, if you have a universal cancer detection test, it is clinically shown to save 80%, decrease cancer mortality by 80% across the board. Do you really think that the FDA is going to say, no, we make it illegal, like forever? It's just nonsensical. It doesn't make sense. But smart people often get sucked into this very digital thinking that you can't just say, well, the FDA cannot just stand in the way of fundamental innovation, because they don't, and they don't even want to. But they think on higher resolution, but who do you know at the FDA did you speak to this person? Do you have evidence that he will be fine with your regulatory pathway and all these things? And I think it's very important in innovation to say, like, okay, these are problems and we have to solve them, but you have to understand these are not fundamental first principle problems. They are not going to just not allow the test. It's just a question of back and forth and figuring it out. That's how I look at, and I think that has something to do with IQ versus EQ. Sometimes you have to say, it's a very complicated problem, but it's not an important problem because fundamentally can be solved. Whereas another problem might fundamentally not be solved, right? So
when you were talking through that kind of process in your mind, and what came up for me there was System 1 and System 2 thinking, and that's the book Thinking Fast and Small. I think that's Kahneman, and he's probably a professor of economics as well. I think, would that be his background?
I think so, yeah.
Have you read that book?
I haven't read that book, but I have read other stuff from Kahneman. I think it's pretty smart stuff normally what he writes. So this is probably also smart, but I haven't read the book.
Yeah, it's just what struck me there was that your brain, so say you're looking at the T level and across the horizontal, they're looking for maybe the obvious yeses or nos and answers, but when they go deeper, they're challenging their own school of thought to probably go into a bit more depth on it. And it's the part of your brain that's kind of lazy versus the part that feels uncomfortable when you go deeper because it's unknown and it's a bit more challenging to figure it out. That's just what triggered. And you mentioned intuition as well. What's your take on intuition?
Well, I kind of have my own little theoretic model about it. That can be totally wrong, but I think that's how I think about it. I mean, basically, I think the brain is just a giant, very complicated processor, right? So we take in certain things and logics and have our rational thinking and understand certain building blocks. And then they're in our conscious mind, right? If we think about something, we kind of bring it up from the subconscious into the conscious. The conscious is like a certain sharp, like processing memory, kind of like RAM. And you have to upload stuff into the RAM to think about something, right? So because you know how it is, you can think about something and suddenly it's in your main memory, in your processing memory, but it's always stored somewhere else. And then you think about it, but you have a very sharp but very narrow focus when you think about a problem. And once you stop thinking about it, I think what happens is it just goes into your subconscious or intuitive processing area. And what that thing does is it processes things on a much lower resolution, but on a much broader, faster level, right? So it's a hyper fast, hyper broad, logical thinking. I think that's what intuition is, because intuition is totally logical, but on a lower resolution and less conscious. And that's why the intuition, that's if you think a lot about things, one piece after another, you're building these little building blocks. And then once you stop thinking about them, they go down, right, in the consciousness level, and then they're down here. And then what your intuition does is it uses all these little building blocks, but all in parallel and much faster. So it makes more mistakes maybe on a granular level, but it makes less mistakes on a big picture level because it takes everything into consideration at once. But these little building blocks you built before, like through your experience through your thinking. So the more you think about it, the better your intuition becomes. And there are actually some super exciting examples from science, how this happened. Like Kekulé, for example, the guy who invented the benzol structure of the benzol molecule, which is round, right? It's like these C's, but they are in a circle. So it's a circular molecule. And people back, he was a German guy, and back in the 1800s, they tried to figure out the structure of the benzol molecule because they knew how many C's are in there and how many H's and O's, hydrogens and oxygens, but they couldn't figure out how to put it together. No one could figure out the structure because they all thought in linear terms, like how do we do it this way or this way, and they could never figure it out. So he thought about this a whole bunch, and then there's a story from himself that it came to him when he was half asleep, dozing off in an overland ride in a carriage. So he was like dreaming, half dreaming. And then he saw a snake in his dream. And the snake was like crawling around and couldn't get anywhere. And then suddenly the snake bit its own tail. So it formed a circle.
Right.
And he woke up and was like, oh my God, it's a circle. And I think that's a great example. Like the intuition is it's not very granular. Of course, it's not a snake, it's benzol, but the intuition doesn't care. It's like, this problem, and the intuition can play around with it much faster and blur more lines. And then find a new solution that is much more creative, much broader. And then you can run with it.
And what role would you think experience has in intuition? Your past experience?
Well, I think the intuition, all it does is it takes your logical building blocks. That's how I call them. Like A leads to B. Like a snake is, straight, but it can bite its tail or something like that, right? So, or they are molecules or whatever. And there are two sources for that, for these little logical building blocks in our brain. One is experience and one is thinking. You can generate them both ways. Of course, you need some experience to do some thinking, but I think everyone can vastly improve their knowledge by thinking based on any given set of experiences, or the other way around. Anyone can improve their knowledge through experiences based on any given level of thinking. So ideally, you have a lot of experiences and do a lot of thinking.
No, very, very interesting. I know we're kind of going in different directions on this. So come back to maybe Quantgene, and I suppose maybe your motivations for going in this direction. What is driving you, maybe even tying into your own purpose, your own values? What is pushing you in that direction?
I think it's two things. The number one thing is, of course, medicine. I believe that I was always unhappy with medicine for some reason. Maybe because I was surrounded by doctors my whole life, and I like them, I appreciate them. But I'm also like very health conscious. I like my health. I love humans, and I don't like when they suffer and die. I think it's just appalling, the whole thing. And I think we just live way below our potential in medicine. I think we're way too conservative. It's still the initial modern medicine approach is like 150 years old, and we still live by these paradigms while technology is exploding all around us. So that's my first motivation. I think it's just ridiculous, like the speed of innovation in medicine, not in a good way. We could make much more dramatic advances, but we have to understand how, and that's why I'm pretty passionate about medical progress. And the second thing is, it goes a little bit beyond medical. I just think in general, I have this little obsession about, the pioneers and the progress potential, and that I think we as a society just do a lot of things wrong. We do a lot of things right, but also, again, we live massively below our potential by ignoring the fact that, again and again and again, we see some very few pioneers, as I call them, like from Bill Gates to Steve Jobs to Elon Musk, to do crazy things like disrupt entire industries single-handedly with a small team, and brings everything like, massive change. And everyone's like, oh, they're great heroes. And I have a reverse perspective. I think these are the normal people. And what the hell is everyone else doing? Right? So you can say, oh, they are amazing heroes. I say like, well, to some extent, what they do is just normal. What the impulse of most children actually is like, oh, there's a problem. What can I do about it? Oh, now it's solved. And I think we have lost, or we never found that innocent, disruptive approach to the world that we say, well, if you don't like something, why don't you just rally up some folks and use your brain and solve the problem? And we can do this on a trivial level or on easy areas, but we can also do it in very, with nuclear fusion or space travel and all these things. So in a way, this just do it and apply some certain principles of innovation. Also, our science should study way more. Elon Musk is a great example. Like, why does no one study him? Why does no one ask, like, how does this work? Why did NASA fail and he doesn't? Why does Boeing fail and he doesn't? Why do all the car companies fail and he doesn't? Look, we can't just say, oh, he's a magical creature. He's not. He's just a dude who thinks in a certain way. Why don't we decipher it and start training our kids in college to think the same way? It's not rocket science, no pun intended. It's like, just say, okay, it's normal. He does great things. Let's study why he does it, how he thinks, and train more people to do it. And then we have more Elon Musks.
So, that was my next question, I suppose, before you kind of maybe answered it. But do you feel that the way kids are educated from a very young age is creating like boundaries in how they think, and that the model needs to be massively changed?
Yes, you guessed it. No, I think so. And I think this education debate is also terrible because everyone debates something. Oh, we need more iPads, or we need more this or that, or we, whatever, or we need more STEM education. And I feel it's so low level, the whole discussion. It's like, no, what we need is take a step back and take a fundamental approach to education. What is the purpose of the entire exercise? Like, no one even asked that question, right? What is the purpose of education? How was our current education system created? And what was the purpose back then in Prussia or like Napoleonic, like France? Well, it was that they want to educate the peasants to be able to read because they knew it's a little better because we have manufacturing coming up. They need to work in these factories, and if they think a little bit better, then they can be a little bit more productive, right? And that was great in 1850, but it's insufficient today. And if you take a step back, and a lot of discussions similar to medicine, by the way, we often focus on the weakest in society, which I think is great. You have to focus, you have to help everyone. But you should never forget that a society is never driven by the weakest. It's driven by the strongest. So in a way, we have to think way more also about our strongest, the best and brightest. Like, what is their purpose? And how do we educate them? Not just no child left behind. What do we do with the top 10%? And what could they do? And how do we fail them? Because if we fail them, we fail everyone. And so I think the education debate should be much more, what's the purpose of the exercise? What should Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, all these places actually do? And I think the answer is very simple. They should create more Elon Musks. They should focus all these great minds in all these different fields to really hammer home, in some kind of pioneer training camps, guys, solve the problems. And it's also not too hard how you would restructure education to do that. You would basically say, instead of just passively sitting there and being passive receptacles of information, go out and try to solve a problem. Your class should be build a fusion reactor or build a rocket ship or build cars, and that you just get it done.
Yeah, it's funny because I've often thought that we have it the wrong way around, in that you in Ireland you go to school to 17 and you're learning by rote and you just do kind of a memory exam, and then you go to university where you try to have creative thinking and have you can explore but by that time you're already ingrained in a certain way, and it's difficult. So if you were to almost do it the other way around and have that continual openness from a young age with some sort of guardrails, I guess, just to kind of keep people in some sort of structure, but giving them the freedom. But so what you mentioned is kind of having almost like an environment, a commune, where they're like a proof of concept group that would follow Elon Musk's way of thinking and see what they come out with. Obviously that would be a long study because it could take them 15 or 20 years to come to the point where these ideas are coming, but I'm sure in some parts of the world they're doing it differently. And are they getting those results? I don't know if you have any knowledge or insights to that.
Well, I think, of course, in California, there are some people trying some things. So there's the Draper University for superheroes, for example, here in Silicon Valley. But I mean, it's great that people try things. Elon Musk actually founded a school for his kids, right? So they go to his private school. There are startup accelerators like Y Combinator, which I think are interesting. And you had New York Times articles, already saying, is that the Harvard of the future and things like that. And I think startup accelerators especially are kind of precursors of these future universities. I'm very university focused here because I think university and college is the easiest starting point. Because I'm an economist, once you start about K-12 in elementary school, the further you go away from the point where you actually get returns, the exponentially harder becomes to design these programs, which doesn't mean we shouldn't do it now. I'm just thinking, me as a private individual, if I think about funding my own schools, I would start with universities because it's most likely you get a return, right? You take the best and brightest now from Harvard grad school, and then you can turn them into pioneers much more quickly than a kindergarten level person, because that person needs to grow up a lot more. So I'm focusing on that. And I think startup accelerators, especially Y Combinator, is a great example where you create kind of a pressure cooker of innovation, right? I've been actually in there, so it's interesting. You have this pressure cooker thing, and you have 300 other people, and they're all hyper motivated. You have only 3 months to get it done. There's a huge pressure or urgency, and you have to build a company. And it works, as we know, so they're pretty successful. Again, it's like amazing that no one studies that. Like, I mean, they paid over $100 billion in value. So clearly, it's also very profitable. So what's the problem? Like, you could study them, you could study Elon, you can study other innovators. And I also think like what we are talking about is so fundamentally important. It's the central civilizational technology is education, that we can't expect some dude like me or Elon or Paul Graham or whoever just come up and build a school. It's an endeavor. We have to engage into this journey of figuring it out. That's why I'm always grateful for anyone who does something. And it doesn't matter if they succeed or not. They gather more information. And you can, we have the lean startup of Eric Ries. So we have more and more knowledge pieces together. It's like, oh yeah, you have to pivot, you have a runway, you have the engineering cycle, as I call it. So we have all these little things we know: iterative innovation, trial and error, critical thinking. You just have to continue pushing that into some kind of program and test it with real people. And the downside is very limited. You're not going to hurt them. I mean, they're definitely getting smarter doing it. And at some point, someone will solve the problem. And then you can take in 100 talented young people and suddenly have 50 Elon Musks. I'm totally convinced. And I think that's the hottest thing you can invent, obviously.
Very interesting. And obviously you mentioned Elon Musk a lot, and the influencers. Who else that I suppose influenced your thinking over the last number of years? Who do you admire? Who kind of inspires you?
I think Elon is pretty high up there because he's also, I think the magic with Elon is not just his skill set, because other people have also great skill sets and build great things, but his character and how he communicates and how much rage he generates in the establishment, I think, on Wall Street and everything. So I think that's especially compelling, and that he goes, against Boeing and these people. But I mean, I don't like to be fixated on individual people that I idolize too much. I think I'm European, right? So I grew up in Germany and I have my appreciation for Europe, but I have a very deep appreciation for American culture because, like, for people. And it's because there are so many people that worked with me on Quantgene, that invested in Quantgene, that helped me raise money, that connected me to people, that talked to us at the university level, our clinical collaborators. So it's more that I admire some more diffuse, innovation spirit or pioneer spirit that I find it, especially in America, but you still find it in Europe too, of course. And no one is perfect. I mean, Elon isn't perfect for many reasons, but every time I meet someone, and also what you're doing, I mean, I always have this admiration for anyone who does something that tries to, put a little puzzle piece into this greater purpose that I see. And this greater purpose is like the pioneer civilization. And that these podcasts, for example, someone has also built a culture for it and spread the word and get ideas and combine ideas. So it's not that I pick any specific guy. It's more like Elon is a very iconic, I think he inspires a lot of people because it's this culmination of all kinds of things. But I draw my energy and inspiration more from every single person I meet, where I think, wow, this person didn't just do what he was told to do. He, took a little step and said, I can make a difference in the right direction, which means making people more daring, more pioneering, and create this can-do spirit and, create disruptive innovation, or help them do it.
It seems like you're more focused on the ideas as opposed to the person behind the ideas. Maybe in some ways that kind of lights you up a bit more.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like personality cults too much because I think they distract, and it's like a much greater idea than any individual. Because if you bet everything on an individual, individuals make stupid mistakes at some point or disappoint you, right? Or just fail. Or something. If you bet everything on that person and he does something stupid, it lets you down too much. So I rather pick. I mean, people are very important to me, but it's important. Each person delivers a piece of that magic, but the magic itself is kind of beyond individuals.
When you have had mistakes or failures, do you have an approach or a process of how you unpick it and learn from that?
Well, I would say I think that's a strength and a weakness at the same time. I'm not very good in celebrating victories, and the other side of the coin is I'm also have no problems with errors or mistakes. So I think my strategy is more to minimize the amplitude in both directions emotionally. So it's more, maybe it's a German thing. I like to just be this little machine and say, this needs to be done. It doesn't matter if it's a success or failure. It's just part of the process. Do it, get the information, and continue. And so this way, mistakes don't bring you down too much. Unless it's there are errors or failures, and then there are mistakes. I don't like mistakes because mistakes are unnecessary problems. Whereas failures are totally normal. It's like, okay, if I do this, of course I'm going to fail at some point with something. Or to put it differently, failures are for me not a big problem because if I do something, I expect a very long series of failures. And that always happens. So therefore, I'm not very disappointed. It's like, yeah, of course. I mean, if you if you run these algorithms, of course they're going to fail. But at some point, you're going to figure it out.
Yeah. I think there's a culture, though, in different parts of the world has a different approach towards failure. You might get rewarded for failure, but it's ultimately getting you closer to the solution, whereas in other places you could be looked upon negatively for failing. But I think that's changing from the conversations I'm having with people, from the views that I'm beginning to detect seems to be changing a little bit. It seems like you're extremely motivated, you're very focused and planful, I would imagine. How do you balance that with just switching off? What are your approaches to kind of having a bit of a work-life balance? Is there one in there?
That's definitely not a strength of mine, to be honest. That's always a problem. So, I mean, normally I switch off by working at different things. So I'm working on Quantgene, but I'm also working on the Pioneer Society thing, which is more an intellectual exercise, but also we're building, the Pioneer Academy, where we can basically, have a conversation with people and train people. So we are going to launch something probably soon, hopefully. So that actually works, right? So if I would think about Quantgene 24/7, at some point it becomes ineffective. So even though it sounds maybe a little mad, but for me the main the main measurement is not work-life balance, it's overall output and effectiveness. And I know if I only focus on one thing, you have decreasing, marginal returns. It just becomes less efficient because you don't have ideas anymore. And the way to avoid that is if you work at multiple things in parallel, you can switch between these things. And I mean, the social thing, there are definitely like deficits in my life, especially because I moved too much. So now I'm in Los Angeles. I think here we are going to settle here a little bit. And there's definitely a sacrifice on that front. Like when we talk about dating and girlfriends and all these things, it's not something that comes very easy if you constantly move and do crazy things. And that's not a great thing. So I'm trying to improve on that front.
No, it's interesting though. I see it. Maybe you're not at the same level as you, but I would get my partner would at this point know not to kind of question me, but saying like, "Do you ever switch off?" But by me doing this podcast is a strange sort of way of getting energy from it. It's not relaxing. It's enjoyable, but just because it's not sitting down on a couch and just watching TV doesn't mean that you can't relax. So no, I totally understand where you're coming from there. The medicine you're kind of looking to create, or the precision medicine, is very much obviously bounded in data analytics and whatnot. What's your perspective on Western medicines versus Eastern medicines? Anything come up for you there?
I think that also goes deeper into our idea and perception of science. And what it is, and that there is a certain ignorance combined with arrogance when it comes to thinking about our own science, which I think is very dangerous. Like the people who understand science least in the scientific community are always insisting most on being scientific, which is bad. So I think there's this misunderstanding that science means that everything has to be explained through scientifically proven concepts, right? You say like, oh, whatever, acupuncture is stupid because, there is no Western scientific concept that explains how it works. And I think that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of science. It's just fundamentally stupid. Science is the opposite. Science means you have to be absolutely open. You have to be facts and, empirical evidence driven. And then you have to develop new theories, not take old theories and try to fit reality into them. That's what economics does. That's why it sucks so much. So real science starts with observation and then continues with imagination and theory building, and then continues with creating evidence or looking for evidence or falsification of these theories. So it's a very creative process and it needs to always start and end in evidence. So Eastern medicine, it would be all about the evidence. Like, can you show that certain things work? And you actually can. And, then it goes into the other big question in medicine specifically, these clinical studies and the giant problem around them. What I really don't like about clinical studies, also in cancer, is that they are so expensive, which means it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, or if you have evidence or a cure or something, or a great theory. What matters is, do you have money? Because if you have money, you can do your trials. If you don't have money, you cannot do your trials. And so you will never have evidence. And people will always say you are unscientific. So if you want to show whatever, keto or some diet or nutrition thing, the only way to do studies on that is population-wide studies, where you say, oh, after 20 years, these people ate more apples, but it's all completely self-reported and unreliable. A real study, take cancer patients, give them a certain diet or do certain alternative treatments on them. No one can afford these studies. That's the problem, right? You never see a study, oh, we took 1,000 colorectal cancer patients and gave them this and this diet. Here are the results. You never see that study because, you see a study, oh, we had 5 patients and they did that and this happens. And then everyone says, well, that's insufficient evidence. So the only people with the money is, of course, big pharma, and they can do it, or big diagnostics sometimes. And I think that's a little problematic. So I wish we would have more systematic science and make it easier to do it, so we can actually do real unbiased research of people who are truly interested in keeping people healthy, instead of being interested in selling a product.
Okay, so you would imagine there's probably a lot of brilliant medicines or solutions to diseases out there, for example, but they're just not getting the funding to do the potential clinical trials that would prove it. Would that be fair to say, do you think?
Yes, and there's another perverse problem, and that is, even if you have, let's say you find out baking soda cures cancer or something, right? I'm not saying that's the case. I think it's not the case. But just assume you find any kind of normal stuff that, if given in a certain dose in a certain way, combined with another normal thing, decreases, or cures metastatic cancer in like 15% of patients. So the problem is, but in order to prove that sufficiently for the FDA, you need, whatever, $10 million for a study, or probably 50 million, whatever. So who's going to give you the 50 million? Right? How do you raise money for that? And the answer is you can't, because the stuff cannot be sold for a lot of money. You can't suddenly amp up the price for baking soda by like 10 million%, because how? I mean, it's just available everywhere. So it is a big problem, I think, that the business models today in pharma require you to have a product that is defensible and that is very expensive. If you don't have that, you don't have a business case, you can never raise the money. Which I understand as a capitalist and economist, why should I give you 50 million if I'm guaranteed to lose it all? Because either it doesn't. If it works, I lose it all. If it doesn't, I will lose it all. So why is that an investment case? And it sounds like terrible, and you think, but people should be better than that. And they think about other people. It's like, but that's not how capitalism works. If you want money. So I think that's a little bit of a problem. It's a business model problem. And I'm really in that field, so I see it every day. You need a plan how to make the money back. And if you find something that's just, I don't know, like if you eat 2 apples a day, you decrease something or you defeat some cancer, no one is gonna fund you.
I hear you. So would you consider yourself a leader?
A leader?
And if so, what makes a good leader?
I mean, I think, well, maybe I don't, the reason why I'm a little hesitant is that I don't like people who want to be led. So that's, makes me a bad leader probably, because the leader needs to be led. But let's say, I think I consider myself someone who takes the initiative and tries to do something and tries to motivate other people to also do something. I see that this works to some extent. And I think what makes a good leader should be, there is this, I think it's very important to inspire people to some extent, to show why it's worth doing something. Not what needs to be done, but why it's worth doing it. And so you have to paint to some extent some kind of vision or future that is exciting and compelling. So that's one element. And I think the other element, of course, is you have to lead or inspire by example, and there's no way around that. I think everything else might sometimes work, but it's not good. Like, you have to represent if you preach some kind of new world thing or vision, you have to be part of that already. You have to represent that new thing. Otherwise, you are like fake. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I just threw it in there. Just interesting as you're kind of talking through it. It's a question I've asked a lot of people about leadership traits and see similar patterns coming up out of it. Maybe one or two final ones, Joe. We're coming up on an hour. How do you approach goal setting and how to get things done? Do you have a go-to plan, or just interested to see your perspective on how you get to outcomes? How do you get to results? What sort of methods do you use?
Oh, I think that's a very difficult question, because from the outside it looks a little chaotic sometimes. So I'm extremely goal focused, right? I know what we need, But you have to be very cautious about planning. That's one of my favorite topics. I'm very first principles driven. You have to exactly know where you have a high level of certainty that you're right. And you have to know when you don't. And so, for example, if we say, I know for sure in order to launch our product, we need a clinical study, and this clinical study needs to have good results. To have good results, we need to do everything we can on the technology side to make it happen. That's kind of the big picture goal and plan. And then within these kind of strategic objectives, make the technology work, and then make the clinical trial work, and get enough samples in, and get enough collaborators in. You have to be extremely flexible all the time. And I think that's why I might not be on the same page with other people. I really am critical of planning. I think planning is very dangerous, because what if you have to change it, right? So you have to, in a way, I'm constantly thinking about, like, what do we have to achieve? Where are we at right now? What new information do we have? And then replan it. So it's really not a fixed plan. It's
agile.
And then stick to them. But you have to be very cautious not to plan things you cannot plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my background is project management, and we would have done a lot of waterfall type project planning, which are quite, in 9 months' time we're going to have our big bang release of X, Y, and Z. But obviously, as the world is changing, we're a bit more iterative and a bit more agile and shorter time frames, and that seems to be in certain product development worlds, that's definitely a little bit more acceptable these days. So it sounds like you're in that space a little bit as well.
Yeah, and one of my favorite metaphors, I don't want to be too militant here, but one of my favorite metaphors is always war and Navy SEALs, like elite forces, because that's how you have to operate and how you have to plan. You plan everything excessively before you start, but you're aware the first second you are in the mission, everything is going to change, and you have to react fast, and you have to be able to change your entire plan very, like, on the spot. So I think that's very important, but that doesn't mean you have to be a moron. You have to be very smart in how you do it. Then you have to ask these questions, like, how do you understand? It's very similar. It's like, basically you have 5 guys and they are in enemy territory. They have to blow up a power plant or something. That's their mission. But, there is a huge number of unknowns, and they can even abort the mission. Sometimes that's the right thing to do, or change the entire path. So I think that's a much better paradigm than waterfall planning for Volkswagen or something, because that's not how the world works anymore, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. So let's just wrap it up. Just looking into the future, talking about planning is probably a bad question to end on, because we don't want to look too far ahead. But what's in the very near term for you and for Quantgene, and maybe how people can learn a little bit more about it?
Well, I think we made tremendous progress. It was very interesting the last 3 years, and we are now likely to actually have something that will change people's lives, people who are concerned about cancer and want to do something about it. And very short term, I think this year probably we will have something available, at least in the US, maybe starting in California, but we have to see, but probably all over the US. We'll be very selective, so it's very helpful when people approach us, because we won't do like a giant marketing campaign around it. We will take this step by step, aim at a select, smaller number of customers and physicians who really are cutting edge and want to be part of this. But we are, of course, open to anyone who's interested. So we do it a little bit more. We have good networks, and people normally get it very quickly. So because there's so many things to fine tune, we don't do a big national launch. We just say, well, it's available. We build kind of our little tribe of people who are the most concerned and also most sophisticated about genomics cancer detection, who have smart doctors too, and work with them and do this the first year. And then we scale it up year after year. That's kind of the plan. So anyone who's really concerned about things or is into genomics and cutting edge medicine, should definitely follow us. Go on our website, write me an email. It's all on the website. jb@quantgene.com if they want to know. And our approach will be pretty much, because it's so innovative, the entire cell-free DNA and early detection field that it's important to work with the best oncologists and a handful of the best primary care physicians, a little bit more than a handful, in patients, who are really engaged in this field for the initial rollout. That's kind of our strategy.
And if just to maybe talk me through very briefly, like if somebody wants to get tested, just talk me through the process of how somebody's tested or how it might actually go from testing to diagnosis.
It's very straightforward. You go to your doctor, so it will be doctor driven for now for regulatory reasons. The physician needs to be involved. And it's a blood draw, very simple 10 milliliter blood draw, takes a second. You can also do it together with your annual blood draw. And then it's being shipped to our lab in Irvine. And turnaround time is probably 5 to 7 days. And you get a report back that your physician is going to interpret. But the report is pretty straightforward. Does the mutational landscape of your cell-free DNA match in any way that of a cancer patient, or of an early stage cancer patient, or of a precancerous patient? And if that's the case, there is a set of procedures in place that we developed with the best oncologists here in multiple centers here, that tells you what to do next. So it's not a confirmatory test, of course. It's something where it's like, oh, you are in a high-risk bucket, you should get a colonoscopy, or you should get, a CT scan, whatever it is. So there are guidelines for each cancer. And if everything is okay, you have a much higher chance that actually everything is okay. So that's how the whole thing works. And the key is that it's single molecule precision. So it's an extremely high precision that allows you to stay on top of cancer. That's the whole idea. To intercept it so early that even if there is something, it's probably going to be precancerous, then you can be tracked, or if it's very early stage, it can be operatively, like surgically removed. And that's the main message. The whole point is to reduce the fear of cancer by being so on top of it that the probability that it slips through the cracks becomes very small, and that means you will be detected with a much higher probability at a very early stage, which means you have 95% cure rates at that level, at that stage.
Cool. Do you see yourselves working closely with like the likes of, Ancestry.com or 23andMe, and is there kind of overlaps? Is there relationships there?
There's a surprisingly little overlap, actually, because what they do, even though it sounds very similar, it's actually very different.
Okay.
Because they look at your healthy DNA, it's much easier to do, and then it's hereditary. So we are not looking for a risk or probabilities of cancer. We look for cancer. That's why it's so much more advanced and more difficult to do. We basically tell people, well, it looks like you currently have early stage cancer, which is very different from saying you have a 20% increased lifetime risk, because who the hell knows what that means? Like, it's very not actionable.
Right.
And we also use blood samples. That's why we need to use blood. Whereas 23andMe, it's all like swabs. So it's a different, so we can't really partner with them because they do something different. It's more comparable to your annual blood works or other protein-based tests, only that it's much more comprehensive and very different tech.
Okay. Very good. Jo, look, thanks so much for giving us the run-through of Quantgene, but also of you and learning about you. I'm fascinated to see where you will go. I think there's definitely comparisons to Elon Musk there from listening to you in lots of ways, and your thought processes and ideas are fascinating. So looking forward to tracking your journey, and hopefully with Quantgene it all works out really positively as well. Thanks for taking the time out.
Yeah, thank you so much, and also thanks for doing the 1% podcast. I think it's a great thing, and we need these things. Thank you.
Please spread the word in Silicon Valley. I'm happy to come over and do some in-person interviews in the future if needs be.
You're always invited, but if you come to LA, let me know. I can give you a tour of the lab, and you're always welcome here.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jo. Have a great rest of day in Santa Monica. Take care.
Take care. Thanks a lot, Rob.
Thanks. Hey guys, just before you go, I'd love to hear from you if anything specific stood out from that episode, something you might take away and try and implement in your own personal or professional life to help make you that little bit better. On the other side, is there anything you think I could do better to make the show even more enjoyable, more impactful, and maybe meaningful? So drop me a note, rob@robofthegreen.ie, or connect in on any of the social platforms at Rob of the Green. We also have a community on Facebook. Check that out. If you're really enjoying the show, maybe you could try and leave a rating or a review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts app. Go in there, give us a rating, let us know how we're doing. That'll help with the ranking of the podcast up those charts. The more folks that potentially see it, because we're high up, the better. The more that might listen that never heard of it before. And the goal of the show is to try and reach more and more people and have that impact more and more. So that's down to you. Please do help me with that. I'm not going down the route of hiring podcast promoters, quote unquote, from other parts of the world, because they say they can help with the ranking, and I don't really believe them, or it's not very authentic. Help me do it in an authentic way. I'd really appreciate it. This year I'm going more all in on Patreon. So it's $3 a month. You can sign up, subscribe to Rob of the Green on patreon.com. That will give you access to Patreon only content. Nearly all the episodes of the 864 podcast are on there, and new ones will be added only there. The 1% Better show will have early releases there, but will still come out for free on robofthegreen.ie. There'll also be live shows this year, some phone-in shows, extra content. €3 a month will, hopefully, the more folks that subscribe, allow me to do more and more stuff on there, add more and more content. At the end of the day, that's the price of a pair of socks, maybe, that you might lose, or a coffee. One way or the other, it's up to you. If you want to join, you'll still get free stuff otherwise, but if you're enjoying what we're doing, help us grow, help us expand it. I'd really appreciate that. Adding new stuff onto the website all the time. There's an affiliates page under the Be Better drop down. Check in there. There's training courses that you can sign up to. More and more stuff will come in over time. Into season 3 now of this fun journey. Huge learning. Hopefully you're getting something from it too. Stick with it. Let's keep going. Enjoy the journey even more. Have a great day, week, weekend, and thanks for checking it out. Good luck.